Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Engel. I am the president of the Ward 6 Democrats, and I wanted to thank all of you for joining us this evening. Obviously, the event is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel later this week. The Ward 6 Demos host events like this as part of fulfilling our mission. This particular event fulfills the part of our mission that is hosting educational events with locally elected officials and community leaders around topics of importance to our community. Our mission also includes building community across the diverse neighborhoods of Ward 6, electing Democratic Party candidates in both DC and outside DC, educating voters, supporting Democratic Party ideals and principles, and working towards DC statehood and lately protecting home rule. You can learn more about us at ward6dems.org. And we started this series on public safety in Ward 6 a little bit more than a year ago. And then, obviously we ended up going on hiatus due to the 2024 elections, first the DC primary and then the national election. So we're pleased to be able to pick things back up. The situation with regards to public safety has changed quite a bit in the past year, which is one of the things that we'll be talking about tonight. I do want to remind folks, of course, that anytime we're talking about issues related to either the criminal legal system or public safety, it can be emotional for people, and it can be a challenging topic. So I'd like to just encourage everyone and remind everyone to keep the concept of building the beloved community at the forefront of our minds as we grapple with these topics. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ward 6 Dem's Second Vice President Maggie Edwards to introduce Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. As Elizabeth mentioned, my name is Maggie Edwards, and I'm the second vice president here with the Ward 6 Democrats. I also serve as the chair of our Young Dems of Ward 6 committee. I want to, again, thank you all for joining this evening. And also want to give a special thank you to John Mandel, who is one of the DC Dems add-on committee men and is also a member of the Ward 6 Democrats here. And he, did a great job in helping us coordinating this event and getting this pulled together. So thank you, John. Before officially passing it over to Councilmember Pinto for some introductory remarks and then to share with us about the Secure DC Act, just wanted to go over some of the process for this evening. So we are going to, of course, hear from Councilmember Pinto and then jump into some Q&A. But just some reminders for folks to please make sure you stay on mute during the presentation part. And if you do for some reason come off of mute, we'll just go ahead and mute you. When it is time for Q&A, if we do get to some live Q&A here in the time that we have today, you can either use the raise hand function or type your question in the chat, which we will be keeping an eye on. And then just wait your turn to be recognized, and then whenever it's your turn, you may go ahead and ask your question. And as Elizabeth noted in her welcome, we do know that crime in the community is a fraught topic, so please treat everybody on this call with respect. And try to really stay focused on the root causes and solutions and avoid stereotyping individual people or situations. And before officially turning it over to Councilmember Pinto, I just wanted to take a quick moment and give a quick introduction for her. So Councilmember Pinto serves as the Ward 2 council member on the DC Council. She was first elected in 2020, and at that time, and she still is, she's the youngest member elected to the DC Council. And in January of 2023, she took over as chair of the Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety. So Councilmember Pinto, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Maggie, and thank you, Elizabeth, and everybody for having me. And I want to especially thank John Mandel, who helped coordinate getting this night together. And so I'm so happy to have the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. I'm really glad that Elizabeth mentioned as part of your kind of evolving mission set at the Ward 6 Democrats to focus on preserving home rule, because that is now my number one mission that we're working on every day in representing the residents of the District of Columbia and making sure that we can get through the next couple of years with our limited autonomy intact. And that is an evolving challenge. And so it takes really important partnership from all of you to make sure that that happens. So thank you for being partners in this fight. I'm going to speak to you all tonight about Secure DC and then also Peace DC. And so Elizabeth, I think you have some slides. If we can pull those up, it'll help kind of guide our discussion. So as Maggie mentioned, I became chair of the Council's Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety in January of 2023. You all are pros, but just for those of you who might not be aware, what that means is we have oversight over kind of our traditional law enforcement and safety agencies. So that's police, the fire, Attorney General's office, the courts, U.S. Attorney's office, the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, the Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants, the Department of Corrections. And so I say the traditional agencies because so often a lot of what we need to see in the public safety space, it impacts a much broader range of challenges from our education system, our behavioral health system. And so all of those efforts are really important. What I tried to focus on when I became chair is how can I move in partnership with the community and with the agencies within this committee in a way that will be most productive and most effective to curtail what we were seeing in 2023, which was really unacceptable numbers when it came to crime in a very scary way. I literally could not have a conversation with any person in the city without public safety concerns coming up, whether that was walking down the street, at the grocery store, in a hearing about a totally different topic. Public safety was literally in every single conversation that I was having with members of the public and with residents in all 8 wards. And so I went on a kind of listening tour around the city, both hearing from residents, but also working with many stakeholders, from students to parents to our teachers to police officers at every level of the police department, U.S. Attorney's Office, to public safety experts from around the country, to returning citizens, and put together a legislative package called Secure DC. It had over 100 different legislative interventions in it. And so, Elizabeth, you can go to the next slide. This is a picture of me on a Ward 6 safety walk. So there are 3 kind of primary categories that we dealt with Secure DC. The first was how we can better prevent crime. The second was how we can better hold perpetrators of crime accountable. And the third was how we can better improve our government coordination, especially because we have a very unique public safety system in DC that is bifurcated between the local and federal government. So we have a locally elected attorney general who handles juvenile prosecution and a few adult misdemeanors, but for the most part, all of our adult prosecutions are handled out of the U.S. attorney, who is not locally elected. And so that dynamic makes it really important that we're working together with the federal government in any administration on breaking down some of those barriers. So those are kind of the 3 main areas that we focused on, and there were dozens of different interventions in each. So you could go to the next slide, Elizabeth. Great. So the first area we focused on in Secure DC was how we can better prevent crime before it occurs. So we started a first in our city safe commercial corridors pilot. This concept was really, from what I was hearing from the community, of wanting more supplemental supports to the police department. So these are public safety experts that kind of walk up and down our commercial corridors and provide an extra set of eyes and ears on the ground. This was particularly important for a lot of our commercial corridors that were experiencing smash and grab break-ins. So in Chinatown, for instance, after we instituted this, our crime and violent crime in that area went down 87%. It's not only because of this intervention, but I do think it's a really important peace of mind for our business corridors and our residents to know that there's some additional eyes and ears on the ground. This is a grant program that I started through the Deputy Mayor's Office for Public Safety and Justice. We instituted drug-free zones. So these are for a period of 5 days where there is illegal and drug activity. that the police can designate a certain area for 5 days as being drug-free. This has really allowed the police to go into areas where there were kind of the same actors taking over public space and reclaiming that space for a broader public use where crime does not occur. We established a pre-arrest diversion task force that's now operating out of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, which is one of the bodies who meets once a month that I serve on. This is local and federal public safety partners. And this task force is really focusing on ways that we can better provide supports to people who are maybe not committing violent crimes, but are still need some additional supports, especially in the drug and mental health space. Hospitality training program. This is an issue very near and dear to my heart, as my background is in hospitality, but many returning citizens I speak to, or people who are serving a sentence at the jail, tell me about kind of a broader range of interests that they have that's not necessarily available to them programming wise. And so thought if we establish this hospitality training program, we can better set up people for success when they come home. So there's some of the areas that we focused on with crime prevention and ending cycles of violence. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so accountability. So this is a topic that I think sometimes gets misstated in the press or in the public. So one of the main things that we did here was look at our public safety ecosystem and study many cases that were the outcome to me and to others kind of seemed a little bit out of sorts. So for instance, there was a case where somebody was held up at gunpoint next to their car, and the car was stolen. That was prosecuted as an unlawful vehicle theft, not as a carjacking. And that was because there was a Court of Appeals decision that said carjacking is a very limited circumstance where you essentially have to be in your car if it happened. But I think most of us I think that if you are filling your car with gas and you're held up at gunpoint to steal your car, that is a carjacking. And so that's just one example of areas that we looked at current precedent with our courts and how cases were playing out and sought to fill those gaps. So for carjacking, we changed the definition of what constitutes a carjacking, that you have to be in the visible vicinity of your car. And we have seen carjackings go down by over 50% since we instituted this change. We changed the pretrial detention standard. So before Secure DC, it was nearly impossible to hold somebody pre-trial, even if they had committed a very violent offense like a homicide. I thought that it was important to change that standard. So it's still a rebuttable presumption, but if you commit a crime of violence, the prosecutor can argue to the judge that you can be held. It's still up to the defendant to rebut that presumption in every case if you can demonstrate that you're not a flight risk or you're not a risk to the community. So that was an important change in my view, where there are now people who have committed violent offenses that are held before trial and therefore removed from the community, and I think is one of the primary factors that we've seen in seeing some of the reductions and successes in violent crime dropping. Then other filling gaps example, again, we worked with our current system in the region and tried to fill a lot of gaps. So like if you are a person who was out on supervised release and you committed another crime, our courts weren't able to look at the information from your supervision if you were wearing an ankle monitor to say, wait, there was a shooting at Brooke Pinto's house and we have you present at Brooke Pinto's house because the ankle monitor, that wasn't able to be admissible in court. So we made a bunch of those changes that kind of just brought things a little bit more in line with the practical reality of what we were seeing. You can go to the next slide. And then government coordination and oversight. This was probably the biggest area of improvements. We established a dashboard at OUC that is now available to the public every single day with how many seconds it took to answer calls, how many errors there were. And this really has led to so much improvement at OUC, not just for a kind of public, this wasn't meant to shame anybody. This was meant to really hold the agency accountable and make sure we're all on the same page so that every resident and visitor, no matter where you are in the city, can call 911 and expect to have someone answer quickly and get someone dispatched accurately. We changed the rules around fare evasion. So fare evasion, there had been some changes in the law years before that basically disallowed WMATA from doing anything if there was someone who was jumping the turnstile. Since we instituted that change, fare evasion has decreased by 84%. Body-worn camera footage. This was something that we got a lot of input from police on that, of course, in my view, if there is a use of force or any sort of harm on another resident, then police shouldn't be able to review that body-worn camera before they write their report because things might be contested. But for the run-of-the-mill case of, okay, I think Brooke Pinto went down W Street, they are able to now review that footage to write a more thorough police report, which is helping in a lot of our cases. Because in practice, they were just so limited because officers were so fearful of having any sort of kind of mistake in those reports. We changed the rules around vehicular chases so that in limited circumstances, when the public is at risk or when someone's life is in danger, then police can make a pursuit. They were unable to for the last couple of years. We changed the composition of the Sentencing Commission to have a more kind of balanced, holistic representation, to add someone who is a returning citizen to the board, someone who is a victim to the board, the police chief, giving the council more representation. So I think this was important so we can think about all of the ways that our sentencing composition can be fair and just. And then a lot of changes around data transparency. Some of this is kind of internal government stuff, but makes a huge difference. So for instance, our Department of Healthcare Finance wouldn't share with our public safety agencies when there was any information about homicide victims because of their privacy laws. So we changed some of that so we could see, okay, what are the trends between all people who are dying of homicide by gunshot? And how does that match with the trends of people who are perpetrating homicide by gun? And we saw there was a lot of overlap. And now we can work with that data in the criminal justice space and try to intervene earlier. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Great. So I shared some of these kind of as I went, but we really have public safety improvements across the board in every category. Crime is down in every category in every single area of the city. Since we instituted Secure DC, carjacking is down over 50%. Recruitment at MPD is up 12%. I mentioned Metro fare evasion is down 84%. We now have about 94% of all of our 911 calls being answered in 15 seconds or less. That was at 60% before Secure DC. The safe commercial corridors I mentioned, we are hearing from business corridors across the city wanting these grants as well. So we've had a lot of great progress in the city on public safety in the last year. And so I've now spent the last couple of months thinking about what comes next and how can we not just drive down violent crime, but how can we really build sustainable peace in our city? And so I rolled out last week my new Peace DC plan. And Elizabeth, you can go to the next slide. And so kind of similar to Secure DC, I focused here on 4 main categories because again, there are a lot of different aspects. There are 10 new bills in Peace DC. There are other bills that I had introduced last council period that we've reintroduced. There's a proposal for violence interruption merger that I laid out in an outline form. There are programs that I think we need to fund. So it's kind of a comprehensive plan, all of which I think needs to move forward, but it's not one bill in kind of that traditional sense. So the 4 main categories we focused on are empowering our young people and strengthening neighborhood harmony. The second is, again, how to prevent violence before it occurs. The third is supporting our public safety workforce. And the fourth is reducing recidivism when somebody recommits a crime after already having committed one. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so in terms of the first pillar around empowering our young people, we have new protocols around and a new bill for our Safe Passage program. 2 years ago, we transitioned the Safe Passage program out of the Deputy Mayor for Education's office and moved it into the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice's office. I think this is a great thing to really better coordinate our resources and make sure kids can get to and from school safely. But what I worry we've lost a little bit is the connection points between the schools. Some schools have great relationships with their Safe Passage workers, and others say, we don't want you in the school, you're kind of only dealing outside the school. And so I think that inconsistency creates some challenges when we know that a lot of the conflict that's happening outside of school comes into school and vice versa. And so there needs to be more fluid conversation, in my view, between the Safe Passage workers and the principals. We proposed some changes around the kidnapping statute. Again, just kind of a way that the Court of Appeals has interpreted kidnapping to be, it has to be several hours in many cases. So there were cases where someone was kidnapped for 30 minutes and they weren't able to proceed with the kidnapping charge. Supports for our truancy pilot program that we started last year on the council and expanding that. The safe commercial corridors I talked about, and then supporting our justice involved youth. So I could talk about this for a long time, so I'm going to try to say this as clearly and succinctly as I can. But our prosecutorial system for our juveniles is very complicated. But one of the tools that we have are called deferred disposition agreements and deferred prosecution agreements. So this is where a young person may be prosecuted, let's say for a carjacking. They can plead guilty, proceed all the way through the case to be convicted. But then instead of a traditional kind of penalty structure in confinement, they can be given one of these deferred disposition agreements. And what this usually is a set of conditions that you have to meet in order to return home. These are usually things like curfew or showing up at school. But there's very little follow-up if that doesn't actually happen. And what we're finding more and more of is kids have these agreements, but they might not be following the conditions, and then nothing happens. And all that says to a young person is, okay, the agreement doesn't actually have any weight to it. And so what I propose is for a pilot group of 50 kids who have the benefit of a deferred disposition agreement to get assigned basically a full-time trusted adult that would be housed at the Department of Human Services to really better wrap our arms around all of the needs that this young person might have. So if that's help getting them to and from school, great. If that's making sure that they sign up for after school time programs that are available to them, great. If there are other familial or housing insecurity needs, this person can also help connect them to resources that are available to them. It's really a full-time, we call them trusted adults, to really be there for the young person and make sure that they can fulfill all of the conditions of their agreement. And if they don't show up to these meetings, then the agreement can be rescinded. And that's a really important part of this because we have other diversion programs like ACE diversion, for instance, which I think is a great program, does amazing work, but 54% of the kids who are referred to ACE don't show up. So if you're referred to a deferral program, but you don't go and then nothing happens, we're not really making the progress that we need to make with our young people, in my view. So that's for that slide. We can go to the next slide. The second category is around violence prevention. I propose merging our violence interruption programs. Right now we have two programs, the Office of Attorney General and the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. I think that they're both doing really important work. And I want to continue supporting that work, but I think it should be housed under a mayoral agency so that we can better connect the highest risk individuals to the resources that they need. And that's easiest to do when there are sister agencies. I laid this out in an outline format so that the community can really respond to what we're thinking of how that merger would look. So we set up things like consistent training for every VI worker, consistent pay and benefits, a 3-year advisory group that will work to make sure the transition is smooth and the great work that the Cure the Streets program has done is not lost in the transition. A stricter adherence to an evidence-based model for violence prevention work. So this is one that I think we've been talking about as a city for years and years, and we've got to finally move forward in a way that makes sense. You can go to the next slide. The next category is around supporting our public safety workforce. So in Secure DC and the last 2 years in the budget, I've done a lot of work to try to get more officers and firefighters and public safety professionals in the door. So these are things like bonuses and tuition assistance and housing assistance, so that we can have more folks who work for our agencies live in the district. We still only have about 20% of our officers live in DC. And so I think the best way to have community policing is have more officers live here, but it's very expensive to live here. And so those are why those efforts kind of to get folks in the door are really important. Now what we're trying to do with Peace DC is have fewer officers leave once they've already started. And so we have a new program proposed for retirement benefits for MPD officers, firefighters, and DOC correctional officers, which is also facing major staffing challenges. To say, okay, once you're eligible for your retirement benefits, you can earn them, but you can still stay on the force and earn your salary. And it's kind of this great thing that costs the district almost no money, because we would have to backfill for that position anyway and go out and try to hire someone to take that job. But instead, we'll be able to keep more of our senior folks on the force and in the departments while they have this great financial benefit of continuing to earn their retirement. So that one's getting the most excitement, I would say, from our public safety workforce. We have other areas that we propose around college credits for MPD to kind of continue to make sure we're meeting them where they are with getting them in the door. You can go to the next slide. Okay, and then the last category is around reducing recidivism. So when I meet with returning citizens, whether they're coming back from DOC or coming back after 30 years from time at any Bureau of Prisons facility all over the country, the biggest barriers are around housing and employment. And so this is a space where we have a lot of different proposals. One area is, I mentioned you could be serving a sentence anywhere in the country. That's because we're not a state and we don't have our own prison system here. And as a result, people are losing so many connections with their community and families many times if you're serving a sentence across the country. And so I propose that we start a new program where during the last 6 months of your sentence at a BOP facility, you can be transitioned back to DOC so we can start helping with the reentry process. I also propose a requirement that any DC resident serving time in a BOP facility can only do so within 250 miles of DC. We started a new housing pilot program to incentivize people to house returning citizens. This idea actually came to me from some wonderful residents who kind of on their own volition took it upon themselves to open their homes to people who are returning home from prison. And it kind of led into this additional community that they created. And so we want to incentivize that, whether that's for a family member or somebody else to have a place to stay. We provide private sector tax credits to hire returning citizens. We break down some of the barriers that we have in our own local government for getting folks connected to jobs and resources once they come home. So this is an area that I think is really important to get right and to right size so that once people have served their sentence and come home, we can do a much better job as a city setting them up for success. You can go to the next slide. Great. So I've been having kind of events throughout the city. I'll be doing a public safety walk in Ward 6 at some point soon. We'll definitely coordinate with you all and Councilmember Allen to make sure that can happen soon. And then we have a public hearing day on April 23rd, government hearing day on Peace DC on 24th, and then the following week we'll have a roundtable on the proposed merger to get into some of these details in a public setting about what that merger would look like. So I really hope you all are a part of that process, and I'm really excited to kind of continue on the progress that we've made collectively as a city, and recognizing that there's still a lot more work to do to really have sustainable peace that I think every person deserves in DC. So I will stop there. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions or comments or ideas people have. Really, whatever anyone wants to talk about. But thank you so much again for having me and the opportunity to share a little bit more about what we're working on.
So one thing I'm actually going to jump in with, just because although it's this is a new question that's not the questions, excuse me, from that were submitted, but can you tell us a little bit more how to participate in those three events?
Sure. So and Hannah on my team is here. Hannah, if I could ask you to put the LIMS link in the chat for signing up for public testimony, that would be the best bet. But all of the information for the hearings is on the DC Council website. I think it's dccouncil.us. And that's all laid out there, but you can sign up through the link that Hannah will put in the chat through our LIMS system.
Thank you, Councilmember Pinto, for sharing that. If we, I think first off would want to turn to some of the pre-submitted questions that we had, since those were submitted by folks who were interested in attending. And then we can always, turn to some other questions that the group may have. So one of the questions that we had pre-submitted is what can be done to ensure that consequences aren't overly assigned to underserved, underfunded, and underrepresented populations?
Sorry, is the first part carceral responses? Is that what you said?
The just what can be done to ensure that consequences aren't overly assigned?
Hmm. So I think this kind of goes back to what we started with, that the public safety system and the agencies that play their role are not the only part of our public safety solutions. I think we have to do a much more proactive job about getting resources to people when they need them, whether that's in our school system, and having earlier recognizing signs when people are at risk. So that's why the truancy pilot was so important. Under the old system, a child could miss 15 days of school and then they'd be referred to OAG for prosecution. But we realized that that's too late. If a child is missing 5 days of school, we need to follow up with them and their family and see if they need resources and how we can be supportive to them. And so that's why part of Peace DC proposes expanding this pilot so that our middle schools can have access to those important resources. That's why in Secure DC we included the pre-arrest diversion task force, recognizing that some people may have other mental health or drug addiction challenges that a kind of carceral response might not be as appropriate for, but we need to make sure that we are responding and that we're not just kind of shrugging our shoulders when it comes to those challenges. I also think it's why the recidivism reduction work is really, really important. That if somebody has made a mistake and harmed somebody else or our community, I do believe they need to be held accountable for that. And I also believe that we need to help set them up for a second chance once they have served their sentence. And so we try to think about kind of the whole lifeline of an individual, and the roles that different agencies in our community can play.
So one of the questions that we had gotten is there is the whole issue of causation and correlation. So one of the things about a year ago we had an Ask Me Anything session with First District Commander Colin Hall. And one of the things that he was talking about is, of course, that even at that time, crime had already started going down in DC. One of the kind of overarching things here was crime went up everywhere as we came out of the pandemic, and it was a little bit slower starting to come back down in DC. But again, even as of a year ago, crime had already begun coming down, and that trend has continued. So again, back to the sort of causation versus correlation. what evidence is there of the impact of the Secure DC Act on our crime rates?
Sure. So it could have been a whole other presentation, but I decided to leave it out tonight. In July of 2023, I moved an emergency bill called the Prioritizing Public Safety Emergency Amendment Act. And it did many of the things that Secure DC does on an emergency basis. So it had the pretrial detention changes, it worked on DNA testing, it changed some of the US attorney's ability to pursue cases, it dealt with fare evasion. And that was the biggest marker as we look at the data of pre-July 2023 and post-July 2023. When we saw the numbers at the Department of Corrections of the individuals who were being held who had been charged with the most violent crime, that we then saw a big spike downward in violent crime. So those were some of the efforts that gave me some hope that some of those interventions were effective, which is why Secure DC built on those and did them on a permanent basis. But when you look at the timeline pre my public safety emergency bill and post, that's when you see the biggest data changes. I'll also say, though, that there are many reasons why we had so many public safety challenges in 2023, and not all of them were legislative or able to be changed legislatively. We had major backlogs in our courts following COVID. We had many kids who were not going to school and then engaged in challenging or antisocial behavior. So there were a lot of ways that our city has come together to kind of work through those backlogs and better connect people to resources and make some other improvements there. But one of my roles is to make sure from a lawmaker perspective that we have filled our gaps and that we can move forward a legal system that makes sense.
Thank you. I actually just want to you're talking kind of about the impact that Secure DC has had. And you've talked obviously about your Peace DC plan, but are there any pieces or anything that is missing from Secure DC Act that maybe hasn't been addressed in the Peace DC plan that you want to kind of use as your next step after that?
Well, I think one of the most consistent pieces that I hear about, and I was in Ward 8 over the weekend, and this was, I'd say, the most consistent challenge that was raised that is not really in Peace DC is family engagement. I talk about it in terms of the truancy space and in terms of supporting our access to justice programs, but I think as a city, we need to better figure out how we can improve our family engagement and make sure we're empowering our parents to be a part of the solution and make sure that they have what they need to do so. There are many parents who are facing very serious challenges. And then when it comes to if their child is committing an offense, there's some distraction there. And so that's an area I'd say Peace DC has dozens of things that we're moving forward on and are excited about, and I think they're all really important. But I think this question of how do we better engage families is still a broader challenge that we're having in the city that we need to do a better job with.
One of the things that you mentioned a moment ago was the whole issue of the judicial backlog, and obviously that's one of the things that's going on here, right? So we currently have, I think, 6 Superior Court judicial vacancies. What's been the impact of that?
So thank you for raising that. It is a huge challenge. So the federal government is responsible for appointing judges to our local courts. They're appointed by the president and they're confirmed by the Senate. We have judicial nominations that were appointed by President Trump during his first term that are still not confirmed by the Senate. So when the federal government talks about, wanting to be part of making DC safe, this is a very specific area that they can help with. Our judges are so overworked, both on our Superior Court and our Court of Appeals, they have far too many cases. And the vacancies of about 25% on both courts is just unacceptable. So I think it has had a big impact on leading to more backlogs, and then leading to judges just getting overworked and retiring earlier in some cases. And so it is really important to make sure that all of those judicial vacancies are filled. And it's something that I talk about every week with our federal partners to make sure that we're advocating in every way we can, whether that's with the White House, with the Senate, with the U.S. Attorney's Office, so that we're all kind of speaking the same language.
Thank you. So I think that brings me to this next question that we have. What would you say the impact of our fragmented system of prosecution, particularly with presidentially appointed U.S. Attorney General Edward Martin prosecuting some cases, and our locally elected State Attorney General Brian Schwab prosecuting others?
Um, I mean, I don't think it is where the system should be. I think we should have a fully represented city with our own prosecution system and our own district attorney, just like every other jurisdiction. If that's not a district attorney, that could be our own attorney general. So we continue to work towards that in the medium and long term, but in the short term, it is really important that we recognize the kind of system we are in, and the ways that we can work with all of those partners to lead to outcomes that are safe and that are what district residents want to see.
Another question about AG Martin. He doesn't necessarily have the best history with DC or the best relationship with DC. And of course, he had attended an Anacostia coordinating council meeting recently that didn't necessarily go particularly well. Now, his appointment may not, in fact, be permanent because members of Congress have started to push back a little bit. But what impact do you think his appointment, should it go forward to and become permanent, have on our criminal legal system and public safety?
Well, I think as an American, there are many very concerning views that he has espoused when it comes to kind of being the president's lawyer, on DEI initiatives for our local law schools, and many others, frankly, that give me great concern. I think when it comes to public safety outcomes in DC, we really need our U.S. Attorney's Office to stay focused on prosecuting local crime. They have lost many prosecutors in their office, and some have been fired and some have left. And so that's something that we continue to push on, whether that's with this U.S. attorney or anyone who is ultimately appointed on a permanent basis, that we need them to prosecute local crime and to build a relationship with our DC community. The best ideas come from DC residents when we're in the community, and Matthew Graves, the former U.S. attorney, was at community events pretty much every week, hearing from people and having the perspectives of DC residents inform his view and his office's priorities. And so I do think, given the system that we're in, where our U.S. attorney plays such a large role in public safety in DC, that those aspects are really important for any U.S. attorney to stay focused on.
I was looking for my unmute button. We did have a question earlier at the start of our time together from Lee Jones, and Lee asked, how can we make housing fair and accessible throughout the district for all levels of the socioeconomic diaspora and statuses? No, it's a little bit different from the public safety topic that we have today, but wanted to be sure to ask that question since we did receive it in the chat.
Sure. So housing continues to be a I think that the number one concern for district residents right now and the lack of access to affordable housing throughout our city. It is a pressing challenge and it is fundamental to accomplish anything any of us want to accomplish is to make sure we have stable housing and affordable housing. There are a lot of ways that the government can be helpful partners in moving forward efforts to create more affordable housing. I'm a believer that we have to have more housing supply to drive down costs across the board. And that's through things like making construction easier, making sure that our zoning laws make sense to build more housing in places that may not have had housing traditionally. And I think that's the single best way to drive down costs. But there's also more targeted ways that I believe that the government should play a role here. So I had a bill called the Recovery Act that we move forward now for tax abatements for conversions for downtown buildings. But I included set asides. So if you're going to get a tax abatement for a conversion, these are for our vacant office spaces to convert to housing. The 20% of the units you provide have to be affordable. Some of our affordability covenants have to do with affordability at 60% AMI, and some are at 80% AMI, some are at 120% AMI. And I think that diversity is important. We can't only provide affordable housing at 30% and lower, but also we can't only provide it for the middle income ranges. And so I think that diversity of requirements is really important. And then I think being creative is going to be really important moving forward on how we can recognize the trends that we're seeing with other interventions that other cities have had. So how can we, for instance, work with WMATA to build more housing above transit? That's something that we can work on with the, oh, thank you. Thank you for the, sorry, area median income. But how can we work with our partners in transit and WMATA to build more housing in spaces that people need access to in a quick way? So those are some of the areas that I'm focused on when it comes to housing. But again, I think the biggest thing that we need to do as a city is make sure that we can build more supply of housing so that more people can afford to live here.
Another question that we had gotten in advance concerns, our brothers and sisters of color. So, people of color are traditionally amongst the highest risk for jail or other types of, criminal legal system punitive measures. What proactive measures does the Secure DC Act or the Peace DC initiative recommend to keep our most vulnerable populations out of involvement with the criminal legal system?
So yes, it is true that our Black and Brown residents and neighbors are disproportionately represented in our justice system. It is also true that our Black and Brown neighbors are most likely to be victimized by these violent crimes. And that was something that really was moving to me as we moved through Secure DC legislation. It was most often residents who were very insistent that every neighborhood deserves to be kept safe, not just neighborhoods in certain parts of the city. And so that is just an important element that I was moved by and that I want to raise in any of these conversations. But in terms of the proactive, I mean, I've talked about this a little bit, that the Secure DC legislation really focused on agencies that are within the Judiciary Committee. So the preventative efforts were around the safe commercial corridors, because I started that out of the Deputy Mayor for Safety and Justice's office, establishing hospitality training and improving the food at our jail so that we can drive down recidivism and help set people up for success. The pre-arrest diversion task force that I started, recognizing that many times people need access to supports and services and not a carceral response when they're in need. There are other things that I believe in that we have worked on as a council and as a city, like the truancy program, like expansion of our crisis response teams and our Department of Behavioral Health response and partnership with OUC and MPD. So there are a lot of efforts underway that I support and have supported to make sure that we can ensure that our marginalized residents and neighbors have access to supports and services and care before we immediately think of a more carceral setting.
So council member, so April is Second Chance Month. I know you talked a little bit about this earlier, but would you mind highlighting again what the Secure DC Act and or the Peace DC initiative do to support maintaining community connections while people are incarcerated? And what do they do to support returning citizens' success?
Sure. So trying to figure out how not to repeat myself too much, but there are lots of things in both bills that do a lot in this area. Secure DC did things like record sealing, so that when people come home, they have an opportunity to seal their record and move on with their life and not have their record kind of plague everything that they're trying to do with job access. Setting up the hospitality training program so we can work with people on developing a broader range of skills in the hospitality industry was of particular interest because of how diverse of options there are, whether that's food service or cleaning or sales or management. There's so many different tracks you can take with hospitality. Peace DC does a lot around barriers to employment, both in the private sector and the public sector, and starting this new housing pilot to incentivize people to house returning citizens. So I'm really excited about the efforts that we've taken so far and think that this is a really important area in Peace DC that we need to move forward on. I will say many of the bills that I introduced as part of Peace DC in this category were not referred to the Judiciary Committee. So if folks are looking for an additional area of advocacy, I would ask that we urge my colleagues on Business and Economic Development Committee, which Councilmember McDuffie chairs, and Councilmember Robert White chairs the Housing Committee to move forward on hearings for these bills, because I think that they are very important to promoting sustainable peace. And I wanted to introduce them, and we've worked hard on them, but I unfortunately don't have jurisdiction over those agencies that they affect.
So it is getting close to 8 o'clock. So I did want to be cognizant of everyone's time and schedules. And so I wanted to, first of all, thank Councilmember Pinto for making time for all of us this evening. Mobilize will send you a follow-up asking for feedback. So do let us know what you thought. Obviously, we've been recording this session, and it will go live on our YouTube channel later this week. And I'm about to drop the link to our YouTube channel in the chat. So if there's anything that you missed from the session, you can go back and hear it on YouTube and or share it with neighbors or friends who may not have been able to join us this evening. Thinking of Ward 6M specific stuff at the moment, we have lots of opportunities to volunteer. Right now, obviously, a big thing that's going on is congressional attacks on, particularly the Republican congressional attacks. Let's call it out here on home rule and DC autonomy. And so there's a lot of fast moving things happening there. There's going to be a lot of opportunities to help with getting out the vote in this year, later this year. Virginia loves elections so much, they have them every year. So we will be working on helping get Dems elected at the state level in Virginia. It's a big year there. It's a gubernatorial year. So definitely look for opportunities there. We've got some upcoming events. We've got a meet and greet with, speaking of Councilmember McDuffie, we've got a meet and greet with Councilmember McDuffie. We just got scheduled today. That's going to be on Tuesday, May 13th. On Monday, June 2nd, we are going to have a fireside chat about the future of the RFK site with our own Councilmember Charles Allen and also Ward 7 Councilmember Wendell Felder. And on June 7th, we're going to be having our biennial convention and election. Also, don't forget that Councilmember Allen will be hosting his annual Ward 6 budget town hall 2 weeks from tonight on Monday, April 21st. You can learn more and stay up to date about all of this by visiting our website, which again, I'm going to pop in the chat, but it's ward6dems.org/join. And don't worry, all that joining entails is signing you up for our monthly newsletter, so bi-monthly newsletter. So don't panic. You're not going to be committed to anything or be inundated with email from us from that. And with that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. Great to be with you all.